Albert Wesker is one of the most recognizable villains in gaming history. For decades, he's been the face of Resident Evil's darkest moments, the man operating behind the scenes, the mastermind responsible for betrayals, outbreaks, and some of the franchise's most devastating moments. Yet the version of Wesker most people remember wasn't created overnight. His transformation took decades. Every success reinforced his ambition. Every betrayal pushed him further from humanity. And every victory convinced him he was destined for something greater than the people around him. That's what makes Albert Wesker such a fascinating character. His story isn't simply about a villain gaining power. It's about a man becoming consumed by the belief that he was meant to stand above everyone else. And the deeper you look into his past, the easier it becomes to see how that belief took hold. Long before the Spencer Mansion incident, long before Stars, and long before Umbrella's secrets were exposed, the foundation of Albert Wesker was already being built. And it all started with a childhood that was never truly his own. Albert Wesker never had a normal childhood. Years before he became a scientist, a soldier, or one of the most dangerous men in the world, he was part of a secret experiment known as Project W. The project was created by Oswald E. Spencer, one of Umbrella's founders, and a man obsessed with the future of humanity. Spencer believed society was deeply flawed. To him, wars, disease, and conflict were proof that humanity needed to evolve beyond its current state, and Project W was designed to help him make that happen. Gifted children were secretly selected and raised under carefully controlled conditions. They received exceptional educations, access to opportunities few people would ever have, and a worldview heavily influenced by Spencer's philosophy. Albert was one of those children, and from an early age, he excelled. He was intelligent, disciplined, and relentlessly ambitious. Teachers recognized his potential, mentors took notice of his abilities, and success came naturally to him. And with every achievement came another reminder that he was different from the people around him. Over time, those messages began to shape how Albert saw the world. He grew accustomed to standing out, accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, and accustomed to hearing that his future would be extraordinary. Most people spend their lives trying to find their place in the world. Albert grew up believing the world would eventually belong to people like him. And as years passed by, that confidence developed into something stronger. A belief that rules applied to other people. A belief that limitations were meant to be overcome. And a belief that greatness wasn't something he hoped to achieve. It was something he expected. Those ideas would follow him for the rest of his life. And once he eventually entered Umbrella's world of corporate power, scientific breakthroughs, and viral research, those beliefs would find the perfect environment to grow. When Albert Wesker entered Umbrella, he found himself in an environment unlike anything he had experienced before. The company wasn't interested in creating ethical scientists. It wanted results. Ambition was encouraged, and competition was relentless. And the people who climbed the fastest were often the ones willing to do things others wouldn't. For someone like Wesker, it was the perfect place to thrive. During his time at Umbrella's executive training school, he quickly established himself as one of the organization's brightest prospects. Among the hundreds of students passing through the program, only a handful stood out. One of them was William Bergen. Eventually, the two young researchers formed a close partnership and quickly became the stars of their class. Their intelligence impressed Umbrella's leadership, but what truly caught the company's attention was their willingness to push boundaries. And before long, both men were recruited into some of Umbrella's most important research projects. For Wesker, this wasn't simply another opportunity. It was validation. Everything he had been told as a child seemed to be coming true. He was succeeding, advancing, rising faster than the people around him. As his responsibilities grew, so did his confidence, and so did his ego. Working inside Umbrella also exposed him to a world few people ever saw. secret laboratories, human experimentation, the development of viral weapons. Most people would have been horrified, but Wesker adapted remarkably quickly. The deeper he became involved in Umbrella's operations, the easier it became to view people as assets rather than individuals. Subjects, employees, researchers, everyone served a purpose. Everyone had value only as long as they remained useful. It was a mindset that existed throughout Umbrella, but unlike many others, Wesker embraced it completely. The company gave him knowledge, resources, access to some of the brightest minds in the world, and with every success, his belief in his own superiority continued to grow. By the time he arrived at the Arclay laboratory alongside Birkin, Wesker was no longer simply a gifted young scientist with enormous potential. He was becoming the exact kind of person Spencer had hoped Project W would create. Someone brilliant, someone ambitious, and someone who increasingly believed that ordinary people existed beneath him. As Wesker's career inside Umbrella continued, he found himself working alongside some of the company's most influential figures. Among them was Dr. James Marcus, one of Umbrella's founders. He was a brilliant researcher, and one of the men largely responsible for the discoveries that helped build the company into a global powerhouse. For a time, Marcus served as both a mentor and a superior to Wesker and William Birkin. The two young researchers learned a great deal from him while helping advance Umbrella's viral research. But inside Umbrella, loyalty had an expiration date. By the late 1980s, tensions between Marcus and the company's leadership had reached a breaking point. Spencer viewed Marcus as increasingly unpredictable and no longer trusted him with the future of Umbrella's research. Eventually, a decision was made. Marcus had to go, and when the orders came down, Wesker didn't hesitate. Alongside Birkin, he participated in the operation that resulted in Marcus's assassination. It's one of the most important moments in Wesker's entire story, not because of who died, but because of what it revealed about Wesker. Marcus had helped shape his entire career. He had recognized his talent, given him opportunities, and trusted him. But deep down, none of it mattered. When forced to choose between loyalty and advancement, Wesker chose advancement, and he made that choice without holding back. Over the following years, this would become a recurring pattern. Friends became expendable, allies became expendable, and even entire organizations became expendable. As long as something moved him closer to his goals, Wesker was willing to sacrifice it. The death of Marcus wasn't simply another Umbrella conspiracy. It was the first major glimpse of the man Wesker was becoming. A man who increasingly viewed relationships as transactions. A man who measured people by their usefulness. And a man who was beginning to believe that ambition justified almost anything. In the years that followed, Wesker continued climbing through Umbrella's ranks while witnessing some of the company's most dangerous research firsthand. He observed the development of increasingly advanced bioorganic weapons. He saw projects rise and fall, and he watched as scientists and test subjects alike were discarded whenever they were no longer needed. Rather than question the system, he thrived within it. The environment rewarded many of the qualities that had been growing inside him since childhood: ruthlessness, pragmatism, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to get ahead. By the early 1990s, Albert Wesker had become one of Umbrella's most trusted operatives. But while Umbrella believed it was shaping Wesker into a valuable asset, something else was happening. For the first time, Wesker was starting to think beyond the company itself. He wasn't asking how he could serve Umbrella. He was beginning to ask how Umbrella could serve him. By the mid-1990s, Albert Wesker had become far more than a researcher. His work inside Umbrella had already earned him influence, access, and a reputation as one of the company's rising stars. But Wesker understood something many of Umbrella's scientists didn't. Information could be just as valuable as any virus. Around this time, Umbrella assigned him to a new role inside a growing Special Forces unit operating in Raccoon City, STARS Team. Officially, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service existed to respond to dangerous situations beyond the capabilities of ordinary police officers. But unofficially, it gave Umbrella a trusted presence inside the Raccoon City Police Department. Wesker was the perfect choice. He was intelligent, disciplined, and calm under pressure. Everything about him projected confidence and authority. Before long, he became captain of Alpha Team, and nobody suspected a thing. That's what makes this period of Wesker's life so fascinating. For nearly 2 years, he lived a double life. To Chris Redfield, he was a respected leader. To Jill Valentine, a trusted captain. To Barry Burton and the rest of STARS, he was someone they could rely on when things went wrong. Wesker earned that trust. He trained with them, worked alongside them, and led missions with them. He wasn't pretending to know these people. He genuinely spent years fighting beside them, which makes what happened later so much worse. Because while the members of STARS were building friendships, Wesker was gathering information. Every report, every mission, and every investigation, everything eventually found its way back to Umbrella. The entire time, he was simply playing a role, and he played it perfectly. The truth is, Albert Wesker may have worn sunglasses, carried a badge, and commanded an elite unit, but by this point, he was already becoming a master manipulator. He knew exactly what people needed to see, exactly what they needed to hear, and exactly how to gain their trust. The version of Wesker that Chris and Jill knew wasn't entirely fake. It was simply incomplete. They saw the leader and the professional, but they never saw the ambition underneath, the part of him that had already started looking beyond Umbrella. Because by this stage, Wesker's loyalty to the company was beginning to fade. For years, he had served other people's goals, Spencer's goals, Umbrella's goals, and the company's future. But Wesker was growing increasingly convinced that he should be the one calling the shots. He had spent his entire life climbing higher than everyone around him, but now he wanted more than another promotion. He wanted control. And in summer of 1998, an outbreak in the Arklay Mountains would give him the opportunity he had been waiting for. An opportunity to betray Umbrella, an opportunity to betray STARS, and an opportunity to begin building his own future. By the summer of 1998, Albert Wesker had spent years building toward a moment like this. He had earned the trust of STARS. He had gained access to Umbrella's secrets, and behind the scenes, he was already making plans that extended far beyond either organization. Then, the Arklay outbreak began. What started as a containment failure inside Umbrella's hidden laboratory quickly spiraled out of control. Infected creatures escaped into the surrounding forests, civilians began disappearing, and reports of bizarre murders spread throughout Raccoon City. As pressure mounted, STARS was assigned to investigate. For Chris, Jill, Barry, and the rest of the team, it was another mission, but for Wesker, it was an opportunity. Umbrella had its own agenda. The company wanted combat data on its bioorganic weapons and needed someone capable of overseeing the operation from inside the investigation itself. Wesker was the perfect man for the job. Before the mission even began, he secretly sabotaged Bravo Team's helicopter, ensuring the unit would become stranded once they entered the mountains. Then, when communication with Bravo Team was lost, Alpha Team was dispatched to investigate, exactly as planned. Everything was moving in the direction Wesker wanted. The surviving members of Alpha Team eventually found themselves fleeing from Cerberus bioweapons and taking refuge inside the Spencer mansion, and from that moment forward, the nightmare truly began. While Chris, Jill, and the others searched the mansion for answers, Wesker quietly manipulated events from the shadows. He separated team members, controlled the flow of information, and allowed Umbrella's experiments to gather the combat data they were designed to collect. To him, the mansion wasn't a disaster, it was a field test. Even Barry Burton became another piece on the board. By threatening Barry's family, Wesker forced him into an impossible position, and used that fear to maintain control over the situation. One by one, the people around him were reduced to tools. The same thing that happened to Marcus, the same thing that happened to countless Umbrella employees, and now it was happening to his own team. But as the night continued, cracks began forming in his plan. Captain Enrico Marini uncovered evidence pointing toward Umbrella's involvement in the outbreak and started getting dangerously close to the truth. But before he could expose anything, Wesker intercepted him and pulled the trigger himself. Another problem solved and another person discarded. By the time the surviving STARS members reached the laboratory beneath the mansion, Wesker decided there was no reason to keep pretending. For years, he had hidden behind the mask of a trusted captain. Now, everyone would finally see who he really was. Standing before STAR's team, Wesker openly revealed his role in the conspiracy. The mission they thought was an investigation had been orchestrated from the very beginning. Their captain had betrayed them, their trust had been exploited, and their lives had been used as part of Umbrella's experiment. For Wesker, it was the culmination of everything he had been building toward. The moment he finally stepped out from the shadows, the moment he stopped serving other people's plans, and the moment he believed victory was within reach. But then, he released the Tyrant, a creature he expected would eliminate the remaining survivors and leave him free to disappear with Umbrella's research. Instead, the Tyrant turned toward him, and in a single instant, Albert Wesker's entire future changed. Everything Wesker had worked toward inside the Spencer mansion was supposed to end in victory. The surviving STARS members would die, Umbrella's research would be his, and he would disappear before anyone understood what had happened. But instead, the Tyrant attacked him, and the irony couldn't have been greater. After years spent manipulating people and controlling events from the shadows, Wesker was betrayed by the very weapon he had helped create. The Tyrant's attack was devastating. In a single strike, its claws tore through his chest and left him motionless on the lab floor. To STAR's team, Albert Wesker was dead, and for a brief moment, it appeared they were right. But shortly before confronting the Tyrant, Wesker had taken a gamble. Knowing things could go wrong, he had injected himself with an experimental virus connected to a rival organization that he had been working with behind Umbrella's back. The virus had been designed to enhance the human body and grant abilities far beyond normal limitations. The Tyrant's attack should have killed him, but instead, it activated the mutation. Sometime after the battle ended, Wesker opened his eyes. The wound was healing. His body felt different, stronger, faster, and sharper. For years, Wesker had believed he was superior to everyone around him, and now for the first time, he had physical proof. The transformation fundamentally changed how he viewed himself. Before the mansion incident, Wesker was still bound by the same limitations as everyone else. He was intelligent, ambitious, and dangerous, but he remained human. Afterward, that line began to disappear. His new abilities allowed him to move faster than the eye could follow. His strength had surpassed that of ordinary people. Injuries that should have been fatal became little more than inconveniences. All of these advantages reinforced the beliefs he had carried since childhood. The beliefs that Spencer had planted years earlier. The beliefs Umbrella had helped nurture. Wesker no longer saw himself as simply exceptional. He began viewing himself as something greater, something beyond humanity. The mansion incident also gave him something else he had wanted for years: freedom. Umbrella believed he was dead. STARS believed he was dead. For the first time in his life, Wesker was operating entirely on his own terms. No supervisors, no handlers, and no one giving orders. And over the next several years, that freedom would allow him to become more powerful than ever before. But it would also accelerate a change that had been building for most of his life. The more power Wesker gained, the less he seemed to value the people around him. Friends became tools, allies became assets, entire organizations became stepping stones. And as his influence spread across the world, Wesker began drifting further and further away from the person he once was. Not that there was much humanity left to lose. While Umbrella struggled to contain the fallout from Raccoon City, Wesker quietly disappeared into the shadows and began working with one of Umbrella's rivals. Rather than operating openly, he relied on spies, agents, and intermediaries to carry out his plans. One of those agents was Ada Wong. Eventually, once William Birkin's G-Virus research resurfaced during the destruction of Raccoon City, Wesker immediately recognized its value. The G-Virus represented one of the greatest biological discoveries Umbrella had ever produced, and multiple organizations were desperate to get their hands on it. Wesker was one of them. From a secure location, he coordinated Ada's mission as she navigated the chaos consuming the city. While civilians fought to survive and entire districts collapsed into an outbreak, Wesker remained focused on a single objective: retrieving the virus. And when Ada finally confirmed she had obtained a G-sample, Wesker directed her toward an escape route moments before Raccoon City was erased forever. The mission was a success, and more importantly, it confirmed something Wesker had suspected ever since escaping the Spencer mansion. He no longer needed Umbrella. The company had spent years teaching him how power worked. Now, he was proving he could acquire that power on his own. The G-Virus became the first major prize of Wesker's new life. But it wouldn't be the last. With each success, his confidence continued to grow. The rules that once governed his life were disappearing. The limitations that once held him back were gone. And for the first time, Albert Wesker wasn't helping someone else build the future. He was beginning to build his own. With the G-Virus secured, Wesker's ambitions only grew. He had spent years serving Umbrella's interests, helping develop some of the world's most dangerous biological weapons. Now he was free to pursue his own goals, and his attention quickly turned toward another name buried deep within Umbrella's archives: Alexia Ashford. Long before the Spencer Mansion incident, Alexia had become one of Umbrella's most brilliant researchers. More importantly, she had created something that fascinated Wesker: the T. Veronica virus. Unlike many of Umbrella's failed experiments, T. Veronica appeared capable of pushing human evolution in ways the T virus never could. Reports surrounding Alexia's research suggested extraordinary potential, and Wesker wanted to see it for himself. That search eventually led him to Rockford Island, an isolated Umbrella facility owned by the Ashford family. In December of 1998, the rival organization's paramilitary group, the H.C.F., launched a full-scale assault on the island. Saboteurs infiltrated the facility ahead of time, planting explosives throughout the complex and triggering a chain reaction that threw the entire island into chaos. Bioweapons escaped containment. The T-virus spread across the facility, and as survivors fought to stay alive, Wesker entered the island looking for answers. At first, the operation seemed straightforward: find evidence of Alexia's research, recover a T. Veronica sample, and leave. Instead, the mission became far more personal, because while searching the island, Wesker discovered Claire Redfield had been captured by Umbrella and imprisoned within the facility. To most people, Claire was simply another survivor trapped in the middle of a disaster. To Wesker, she represented something else: Chris Redfield, the one man who had escaped the Spencer mansion and lived to tell the story. The one man who continued to linger in the back of Wesker's mind. Years had passed since their last encounter, but Chris remained a loose end, an irritation, proof that even the best plans could fail. Before Wesker could act, however, he uncovered something far more important. Alexia Ashford was alive, and she wasn't on Rockford Island. She was waiting in Antarctica. Suddenly, the entire mission changed. The virus sample no longer mattered as much as the person who created it, because for a man increasingly obsessed with evolution and power, Alexia represented something extraordinary, a glimpse of what humanity might become. And Wesker intended to find her. By the time Wesker arrived at Umbrella's Antarctic facility, however, the situation was already unraveling. The outbreak that began on Rockford Island had spread to the base, plunging another Umbrella stronghold into chaos. Zombies roamed the corridors, security systems had failed, and the facility was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own experiments. Deep within the complex, Wesker finally came face to face with Alexia Ashford. Though the encounter did not go as planned, confident in his newfound abilities, Wesker demanded Alexia surrender herself and her research. But instead, she revealed the true power of T. Veronica. As Alexia transformed before his eyes, Wesker quickly realized he had underestimated her. For perhaps the first time since the Spencer Mansion incident, he was facing someone who had evolved beyond anything he had encountered before. Even with his enhanced strength and speed, Wesker found himself forced onto the defensive, and eventually, he retreated. But despite failing to secure Alexia, the encounter only reinforced the ideas already taking root in his mind. The future belonged to those capable of evolving, and Alexia was living proof. Before leaving Antarctica, however, another opportunity presented itself: Chris and Claire Redfield. After years apart, fate had brought them together once again. At first, Wesker seized Claire and dragged her toward his submarine, intending to use her as leverage. But when Chris finally arrived, Wesker saw something he wanted far more: a chance to settle an old score. So he released Claire and challenged Chris directly. The difference between them was immediately obvious. Back at the Spencer Mansion, Wesker had been dangerous. Now, he was something else entirely. Faster, stronger, more powerful than any ordinary human. Chris could barely keep up. Every exchange made it clear that Wesker had surpassed him physically in every conceivable way, and Wesker enjoyed every second of it. For years, Chris had represented one of the few failures in his carefully constructed plans. Now, he finally had the opportunity to prove just how far beyond him he had become. Yet despite the overwhelming disadvantage, Chris refused to back down. And as the Antarctic facility continued collapsing around them, he fought on, using the environment to his advantage, and ultimately bringing massive steel girders crashing down on Wesker. Moments later, an explosion tore through the facility, severely burning Wesker and forcing him to abandon the fight. Now, for the second time, Chris had escaped him, and for the second time, Wesker was left without the outcome he wanted. The encounter stayed with him, because no matter how much stronger he became, and no matter how many advantages he gained, Chris somehow kept surviving. What began as a loose end was slowly becoming something else, an obsession, and in the years ahead, their conflict would only grow more personal. Following the Antarctic incident, Wesker entered a new phase of his life. He was no longer chasing individual virus samples. He was studying what those viruses could become. By this point, H.C.F. had acquired the G virus, valuable T. Veronica data, and numerous Umbrella research files. At the same time, Umbrella itself was beginning a slow and very public collapse. Wesker saw opportunity everywhere. As biological weapons started spreading across the black market, he stepped into a more active role, helping broker deals and supplying powerful clients around the world. One of those clients was Javier Hidalgo, the leader of the Sacred Snakes drug cartel in South America. For years, Hidalgo had purchased bioweapons from Umbrella, but as the company weakened, its influence began to fade, allowing Wesker to position himself as a far more reliable alternative. The partnership proved profitable, at least initially, but eventually, Hidalgo's obsession with protecting his daughter pushed him over the edge. Consumed by paranoia and desperation, he unleashed a biohazard that quickly spread throughout the region. Entire communities were devastated, bioweapons roamed freely, and military forces were deployed to contain the outbreak. And from a distance, Wesker watched it all unfold. Every outbreak taught him something, every failed experiment revealed another weakness, and every mutation offered another glimpse into what humanity might eventually become. The further he drifted from ordinary people, the easier it became to see the world as one giant experiment. And while the crisis consumed South America, one individual caught Wesker's attention: Jack Krauser, an elite American operative sent to contain the outbreak. The mission left Krauser severely injured and effectively ended his military career. Everything he had dedicated his life to was suddenly taken away from him. For most people, it would have been the end, But for Wesker, it was an opportunity. He understood something most people didn't, that disillusioned people are often the easiest to recruit. Krauser had lost faith in the system he once served, and Wesker offered him something else: purpose, power, a new path forward, and not long after the incident, Krauser sought him out. Soon afterward, he disappeared from public life and entered Wesker's service. It was another sign of how much Wesker had changed. Years earlier, he had been a pawn inside Umbrella's machine. Now, he was building a machine of his own, one made up of soldiers, researchers, spies, and outcasts. People willing to follow him because they believed he could give them something the world couldn't. And with every new recruit, every new virus, and every new operation, Albert Wesker became more convinced of one thing: humanity wasn't evolving fast enough, and eventually, someone would have to force it. By 2003, Umbrella was dying. The company that once operated above the law was collapsing under the weight of lawsuits, investigations, and years of public suspicion. Around the world, governments were beginning to uncover pieces of the truth. But Albert Wesker wasn't interested in watching Umbrella slowly fade away. He wanted everything it still had to offer. And once reports surfaced of a biohazard outbreak in Russia's Caucasus region, Wesker immediately took notice. Hidden deep within the mountains was one of Umbrella's last major strongholds, a facility containing years of research dating back to the company's most important projects. More importantly, it housed UMF-013, a supercomputer containing the Umbrella archives, decades of classified data, research reports, viral development records, and the history of Umbrella itself. If Wesker could obtain it, he wouldn't just possess Umbrella's secrets, he would possess its entire legacy. Once he traveled into the region, he found another familiar scene: an outbreak. Villages had already fallen, BOWs had escaped containment, and the surrounding area was descending into chaos. For Wesker, it barely mattered. He wasn't there to stop the outbreak. He was there for data. And during his search, he encountered two people he never seemed able to leave behind: Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. Since Antarctica, both had joined an anti-biohazard task force and were investigating Umbrella's activities around the globe. Years earlier, Wesker might have welcomed another fight, but this time he barely acknowledged them. The archives were more important. Chris and Jill were chasing Umbrella's past, but Wesker was chasing its future. Eventually, once the outbreak consumed more of the facility, Wesker pushed deeper into the base until he finally reached the control center. Waiting for him was Sergei Vladimir, one of Umbrella's highest-ranking commanders, and one of the last men still loyal to the company. Unlike most Umbrella executives, Vladimir understood exactly what was at stake. He knew what was stored inside the supercomputer, and he had no intention of surrendering it. The confrontation that followed was one of the final battles between two men shaped by Umbrella. One remained loyal to the company until the very end, and the other had already moved beyond it. After defeating Vladimir once and for all, Wesker finally gained access to the archives. Years of research, years of experiments, and years of secrets. Everything now belonged to him. Then, he made a decision that perfectly captured how much he had changed. After downloading the data, Wesker ordered the facility systems to erase the remaining records, not to protect Umbrella, but to control the truth. Chris and Jill had spent years trying to expose the company, but Wesker made sure they would never have access to the complete picture. Only he would decide what happened to the information, and soon after, he made his move. Using portions of the archives, Wesker leaked evidence directly linking Umbrella to the Raccoon City disaster and countless illegal experiments. The impact was devastating. Investigations accelerated, lawsuits gained momentum, and governments finally had the proof they needed. Within months, Umbrella collapsed, and after everything the company had done to shape his life, Albert Wesker became the man who finally destroyed it. But there was no sense of justice in what he had done. no desire to help the victims, no concern for accountability. Umbrella had simply outlived its usefulness, and now that it was gone, there was nothing left standing between Wesker and the future he intended to create. With Umbrella gone, Albert Wesker found himself in a position he had spent years working toward. He possessed the company's secrets. He controlled a growing network of operatives, and for the first time, he had the freedom to pursue his vision without interference. What he needed now was access, resources, and infrastructure, a way to turn everything he had learned into something greater. And he found that opportunity in Excella Gione, a brilliant geneticist working for Tricell. Like Wesker, Excella saw people primarily in terms of their usefulness. Talent mattered, results mattered, and everything else was secondary. Their interests aligned quickly, and using information recovered from the Umbrella archives, Wesker provided Tricell with years of viral research and development data. The impact was enormous. Excella's influence within the company skyrocketed, and before long, she became one of the leading figures behind Tricell's expanding bioweapons division. Together, they began building something Umbrella never could. Not a corporation, but a vision. While Excella supplied the resources, facilities, and funding, Wesker supplied direction. Every new discovery, every new virus, and every new experiment pushed them closer to a future he had been imagining for years. Then, another opportunity appeared, this time in rural Spain. Through Ada Wong, Wesker learned of a strange cult known as Los Illuminados, and a parasite unlike anything he had encountered before, Las Plagas. Unlike the viruses he had spent years studying, the Plaga offered something different: control. Rather than simply mutating its host, it could dominate them, command them, and turn entire populations into extensions of another will. To Wesker, the parasite represented another step toward understanding how humanity could be reshaped. He immediately dispatched Jack Krauser to infiltrate the cult and secure a dominant Plaga specimen. Operating deep within Los Illuminados, Krauser earned the trust of Osman Sadler while secretly pursuing Wesker's objective. But by this point, another problem was beginning to emerge. Wesker's employees were starting to distrust him. The rival organization that had helped him acquire the G-Virus and build H.C.F. had become aware of his growing relationship with Tricell. Information leaks, secret meetings, and suspicious activity all pointed toward the same conclusion. Albert Wesker was no longer fully loyal to them, and they knew it. Fearing that Wesker intended to use the Plaga for Tricell's benefit, the organization inserted Ada Wong directly into the operation. Officially, she was there to assist in obtaining a dominant Plaga sample. Unofficially, she was there to make sure Wesker didn't get everything he wanted. The result was a mission filled with deception from every side. Krauser was pursuing his own ambitions. Ada was secretly working against Wesker's interests, and Wesker himself was attempting to outmaneuver the organization that had once helped him rise to power. By the time the dust settled, Ada had successfully deceived him. The dominant Plaga sample ultimately ended up in the hands of the rival organization, while Wesker was left with a subordinate specimen instead. For most people, the outcome would have been considered a failure, but Wesker saw it differently, because he still walked away with valuable data. And when Krauser later died following his confrontation with Leon Kennedy, Wesker was able to recover additional Plaga samples from his former protege's remains. In the end, he's still got what he came for. More importantly, the incident revealed just how much Albert Wesker had changed. Years earlier, he had betrayed Umbrella. Now, he was preparing to betray the people who helped him replace it. Every alliance in Wesker's life eventually ended the same way. The moment he believed he had outgrown someone, he simply moved on. And by now, he was beginning to believe he had outgrown everyone. By 2006, Albert Wesker was no longer operating in the shadows of larger organizations. He had become the center of one. Together, Wesker and Excella continued expanding Tricell's influence across the global bioweapons market. Using Ricardo Irving as a middleman, they established an underground network that sold bioweapons around the world, while quietly funneling profits back into research and development. On the surface, it looked like a business, but in reality, it was funding something much larger: Wesker's future. Deep within Africa, Tricell constructed a massive research facility in the very region where Umbrella's founders had originally discovered the progenitor virus decades earlier. The location wasn't chosen by accident. Progenitors sat at the roof of nearly every major virus in Resident Evil history. The T virus, G virus, T Veronica, everything traced back to it. And if Wesker intended to reshape humanity, this was where the next phase would begin. But before he could move forward, the past came calling. Near the end of his life, Oswald E. Spencer finally reached out. For years, Spencer had remained hidden while Umbrella collapsed around him. Most people believed the company's founder had vanished forever. Wesker was one of the few people Spencer wanted to see. The invitation led him to Spencer's estate, and there, for the first time, Albert Wesker had finally learned the truth about Project W, the truth about his childhood, and the truth about why his life had unfolded the way it had. For years, Wesker believed he had risen above everyone else through his own intelligence and ambition. Spencer, however, revealed something very different. Albert Wesker was never meant to be unique. He was one of many, one child among a generation selected for a secret experiment designed to create humanity's future leaders. Even the name Wesker wasn't truly his, it belonged to the project. And just like that, decades of questions had answers. Why certain opportunities always seemed to appear, why Umbrella had invested so heavily in him, and why Spencer had taken such an interest in his development. This realization was infuriating, because for perhaps the first time in his life, Albert Wesker felt manipulated. His entire life had been shaped by someone else's design, and standing before him was the man responsible. Spencer expected understanding, perhaps even admiration, but instead, he got a hand through the chest. In a single moment, Wesker killed the man who had orchestrated so much of his existence, the founder of Umbrella, the architect of Project W, the man who spent decades trying to shape humanity's future. But the irony is impossible to ignore. Even after killing Spencer, Wesker couldn't escape his influence, because Spencer's ideas had already taken root. The belief that humanity needed to advance, that a superior future should be engineered, and that certain individuals were destined to lead. Wesker rejected the man, but he embraced the philosophy. Moments later, Chris and Jill arrived at the estate. After years searching for Spencer, they finally found him, but it was too late. The confrontation that followed ended with Jill tackling Wesker through a window and over the edge of a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Both of them survived, but the fall changed everything, because as Wesker escaped carrying Jill's unconscious body, he found himself reflecting on everything he had learned. Project W, Spencer, his purpose, and his future. For years, he had searched for proof that humanity could advance. Now, he believed he understood how to make it happen. The answer would become known as Uroboros, and from that moment forward, Albert Wesker stopped searching for humanity's future. He decided he was going to create it. After leaving Spencer's estate, Albert Wesker became more dangerous than ever before. For years, he had searched for answers. He had collected viruses, studied mutations, and chased every possible path toward human advancement. Now, he believed he had finally found it with Uroboros. Working alongside Excella and Tricell, Wesker spent the next 2 years turning that vision into a reality. Deep within Africa, research continued at an astonishing pace. Massive facilities were expanded, experiments intensified. Thousands of test subjects disappeared into the program. Failure was common and death was expected, but Wesker no longer cared about the cost. In his mind, humanity had reached a dead end. Uroboros would change that. His plan was terrifyingly simple. Those with the proper genetic traits would successfully bond with the virus and emerge as something greater. Everyone else would die. To Wesker, this wasn't genocide. It was evolution, the final stage of a philosophy that had been growing inside him since long before the Spencer Mansion. Eventually, Uroboros was completed, missiles were prepared, a stealth bomber was acquired, and for the first time, Wesker possessed everything he needed to reshape the world according to his vision. But then, Chris Redfield arrived. For over a decade, Chris had followed the trail of bioterrorism across the globe. Again and again, that trail led back to the same man. Now, it had led him to Africa. Alongside BSAA agent Sheva Alomar, Chris uncovered the truth behind Tricell's operations, Ricardo Irving's role in the black market trade, and the existence of Uroboros itself. The future Wesker had spent years building was finally under threat, and as the BSAA closed in, the cracks began to show. Irving was dead, the operation was exposed, and Chris refused to stop pushing forward. The situation reached a breaking point when Chris and Sheva finally confronted Wesker and Excella. By this stage, Excella had dedicated years of her life to helping Wesker achieve his vision. She had supplied resources, influence, research facilities, and unwavering loyalty. More than that, she genuinely believed in him. Unlike many of Wesker's past allies, Excella wasn't simply being used. She saw herself as a partner in shaping the future, someone who would stand beside him when the world was remade. Excella admired Wesker, trusted him, and in many ways placed him above everything else. But to Wesker, none of it mattered. The moment she became a liability, Wesker discarded her. Without hesitation, he infected Excella with Uroboros and left her behind. After everything they had built together, she was reduced to another experiment, another tool, and another sacrifice. Her transformation into a grotesque mass of Uroboros wasn't just a tactical move, it was a statement, because to Wesker, even the most loyal ally was expendable if they no longer served his purpose. In many ways, it was the perfect reflection of who Wesker had become. Throughout his life, every relationship ended the same way. Marcus, Umbrella, the rival organization, Krauser, and now Excella. The moment someone stopped being useful, he moved on. As Chris and Sheva continued their pursuit, they finally discovered one of Wesker's few remaining weaknesses. The enhancements that made him so powerful required a specialized serum to keep his body stable. For the first time in years, Wesker looked vulnerable. Not defeated, but vulnerable. The confrontation aboard Tricell's carrier pushed him further than ever before. Forced to engage in yet another battle, he still managed to overpower the opponents who stood against him. But the advantage he once enjoyed was disappearing. Years earlier, Wesker believed superior power guaranteed victory. Now, he was learning a different lesson, that power alone wasn't enough. As the battle escalated, Wesker launched his stealth bomber and made one final attempt to salvage the Uroboros Project. Chris and Sheva followed, and the fight that unfolded aboard the aircraft brought years of conflict to a head. Even weakened, Wesker moved with terrifying speed, dodging gunfire, closing distances instantly, and striking with overwhelming force. Chris and Sheva were forced to rely on coordination and timing rather than brute strength, exploiting every opening they could find. For Chris, this wasn't just another mission, this was personal. From the Spencer Mansion to Jill's apparent death, to years of chasing shadows across the globe, everything had led to this moment. Wesker wasn't just a target, he was the man responsible for countless lives lost, including people Chris had fought beside. When the struggle finally ended, Wesker was thrown from the aircraft and crashed into the volcanic region below. Most people would have accepted defeat, but Wesker couldn't. With his plans collapsing around him and Uroboros slipping away, he made one final decision. If humanity would not accept his future, he would become it himself. Destroying one of the remaining Uroboros missiles, Wesker infected his own body with the virus, and the transformation was horrifying. The man who had spent decades pursuing perfection became a monster consumed by the very thing he hoped would elevate humanity. Yet even then, he refused to surrender. Deep within the volcano, Chris and Sheva confronted him one final time. Wesker, now fully mutated, lashed out with massive tendrils of Uroboros, his body barely resembling the man he once was. His movements were slower, but far more destructive, each strike capable of tearing apart the environment itself. Chris and Sheva had to adapt quickly. They couldn't overpower him, and they couldn't outmatch him physically. Instead, they relied on precision, teamwork, and sheer determination, targeting exposed weak points, dodging attacks by inches, and pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. And as the fight reached its peak, Wesker dragged himself from the lava one final time, refusing to accept defeat even as his body broke apart. In that moment, he was no longer the calculating mastermind or the composed strategist. He was pure obsession, pure will, a man who refused to let go of his vision no matter the cost. Chris and Sheva seized their final opportunity. With a BSAA helicopter overhead, they were given one last chance with 2 RPGs. The rockets struck Wesker directly, triggering a massive explosion that engulfed him completely. The blast finally ended Wesker's life. The scientist, the mastermind, the architect of Uroboros, and the man who wanted to decide humanity's future. After decades spent chasing power, Albert Wesker ultimately failed for the same reason he always underestimated his enemies. He believed evolution alone made someone superior. But Chris and Sheva proved otherwise, because the qualities that Wesker dismissed as weaknesses, being loyalty, determination, sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for others, those were the very things that stopped him in the end. Albert Wesker spent his entire life chasing superiority. Every success reinforced his ambition. Every betrayal pushed him further from humanity, and every victory convinced him he was destined for something greater than the people around him. For a long time, it seemed like he was right. He survived where others died. He outsmarted his enemies. He outlived Umbrella itself. And he came closer than anyone else in Resident Evil history to reshaping the entire world. But in the end, Wesker's greatest strength became his greatest weakness. His belief that he was superior blinded him to the very qualities that made his enemies dangerous: loyalty, determination, sacrifice, the willingness to keep fighting even when the odds were impossible. Those were the traits that Wesker dismissed as weaknesses, and those were the traits that ultimately stopped him. That's the tragedy of Albert Wesker. The more convinced he became that he stood above humanity, the further he drifted from it, until ultimately, the man who wanted to guide humanity's future became its greatest threat. And that's why, decades later, Albert Wesker remains as one of the most fascinating villains in gaming history, because his story isn't just about power. It's about what happens when the pursuit of superiority becomes an obsession, when power stops being a tool and becomes an identity. And perhaps most importantly, when someone becomes so convinced they're above everyone else that they stop seeing the value in the people around them. Albert Wesker spent his life trying to transcend humanity, but in the end, his greatest failure was forgetting what made humanity strong in the first place.